Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves. Just so you guys know, I am in a remote location in South Carolina, and if I look tired, it's because we drove all last night. But we're going to do this. I'm excited for it. I'm very excited for my guest tonight, and I want to do some reminders, first of all. So we ask that you like the Leather Elves on Facebook and follow us. And that way you'll find out about sales. We've got a sale going on right now that was announced on the Facebook page and on the live stream last week. So, and you can also follow us on Instagram. We try to put up we haven't done a lot lately, but we try to put up different little enrichment blurbs and training things. So check that out on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Leather Elves. So that's the sale there. Thank you, Nick. And it's a BOGO sale. You order one, we send you two. There's no hoops to jump through, no codes to enter. It just magically happens. It's like Nick did it, it looks so easy. So I want to welcome you all tonight. My guest, and congratulations to the class of 2022. We've got graduations happening everywhere. We've got people going on to higher education, people getting out there and getting great jobs, hopefully in aviculture. Let's go for that. We'll, definitely encourage that. So I want to say congratulations to everyone graduating. I want to welcome Phung. Phung has been with us before. For those of you that missed it, you should go back and watch it. But I'm going to give you his bio really quickly. He's so important. He's getting phone calls. So Phung is the director and operator of Animal Behavior and Conservation Connections and Behavior and Training Solutions, an education, show production, and consultancy company. Phung works with a team of birds and staff to provide free flight shows to zoos in the U.S. through ABCC. He travels to aviary zoos and aquariums around the world to teach animal training and set up behavior programs through BTS, Behavior and Training Solutions. Hey, Phung, how's it going?
Hi, Robin. Thanks for having me. And we're all trying to do multiple things, right? You just moved there. I think you said you're working on some things, and I am just pulled off on the side of the highway to to be with you today. And so I'm actually operating out of my van right now. And
Nice.
I've got the birds. I've got the birds with me. We want to introduce you to our little friend here. This is our white-faced owl, one of the
Because
babies,
everybody
Ash.
has a white-faced owl in their van.
Don't you?
No.
Yeah.
See, guys,
No?
this is
No?
what you can have if you have a career in aviculture. This is what can happen. So there you go.
This
Something to
too could
strive
be
for.
you. Yeah. This too could be you. You could be working out of a van on the side of a highway.
As long as you're not living down by the river in that van, we're good. So,
Not yet. Not
so,
yet.
so I know, Fung, you just started a new project. Do you want to tell us about that before we get started?
Sure. Yeah. We're right now at the National Zoo in DC, and that's actually where I'm coming from. I'm just heading back to our facility tonight, and so that's why my circumstance is the way it is right now. Yeah. So we're kind of making things up on the fly here, and yeah, we're doing a full free flight show at the National Zoo all summer from now until September. So if you're in the area, come on by and say hello.
Well, I gotta say, Fang, the AFA, American Federation of Aviculture conference is in Herndon, Virginia in August.
Hmm.
They're going to be there. We are going to be there for 2 or 3 days in August. And so I
Hmm.
think I'm going to corral people and do a side trip to the zoo if we can. So we'll have to connect and
Sure.
figure out what that looks like. So,
Yeah, yeah. Come see
um,
us, and I'll get you free entrance to the zoo.
you're such a buddy and a pal. I went to school in DC. I know the zoo is free. I should have just let you look like the good guy. I'm sorry, because you are the good guy. So we're going to talk about enrichment tonight, right? I'm finding this whole conversation very enriching. You're doing this because I've only had minimal sleep in the back of. Actually, I can relate to the van thing because I slept in the car at a rest area last night. So yeah, it makes sense. Um,
Yeah, we're doing the
so
exact same thing, Rob.
but I don't have an owl in my car. I had Mark instead. Um, So for me, the definition of enrichment is enhancing quality of life. Anything that enhances the quality of life for an animal. And the way you know that it's enhancing quality of life is through observation and data collection. So, um, do you have what's your definition of enrichment?
Yeah, mine would be the same, Robin. It's I try and keep things
We don't have,
simple. We don't try and
yeah,
complicate it too much. And yeah, it's really a process that enhances or improve the quality of care of the animals, the quality of welfare and of the animals in our care. So keeps it pretty broad.
okay,
If we were to narrow it down a little bit,
yeah.
we could add improve the physical and emotional quality of the animals in our care.
Yeah, I think it definitely it this is one of those things, like, when we talked before about errorless learning training, um,
Yeah.
it's on us to kind of
Mhm.
figure out what is enhancing that quality of life and what is enriching to the animals in our care, and how do we enhance their welfare by giving them the right type of things. So,
Right.
um, how do you think, or do you think it differs when you're doing what you do for a living, or what bird trainers do, what we do, working with animals all the time, versus what happens with a companion parrot owner? Do you think is
Yeah.
there a difference?
There's a difference in terms of implementation of the program, you know, and I'll add to there's a third one. So between what I do in terms of free flight programs, and then in terms of pet parrots, and then there's also another one where uh, it exists in a zoological setting as well. And so
Mhm.
those programs we work with too, and so they're slightly different, in terms of their
Right.
requirements and what their needs are for their animals. But I'll start with me first. With us, we view enrichment as part of a process, so we don't necessarily separate enrichment as an entity in itself. For me, everything is intertwined, right? So enrichment
Mhm.
and training, nutrition, everything that we care for the birds, it's kind of all one process for me. I don't break it down so clearly. You know, Sometimes enrichment and training kind of blur together and vice versa. And in a zoological setting, sometimes they have to break it apart just for their process. And when
Right.
we go and set up programs for zoos, we do that for them as well. Just because it's a little bit easier for them to understand, a little easier for the keepers to implement those programs, and then it's a little easier to evaluate as well. You know, with
Mhm.
everything that we do, as we set up goals to establish these programs, we also need to be able to circle back and evaluate them to know whether we've met our goals or not. So that's why in some of the zoological settings, it's a little bit more complex and simple at the same time. You know,
Right.
what we do is simple but complex.
I
You know,
think, I found when I was working with zoos at facilities setting up enrichment programs, one of the, it had to be in most of the situations, it had to be very scheduled and directed so that
Hmm.
there
Yeah.
wasn't, not to say that because zookeepers are wonderfully creative in finding resources and finding ways to enrich their animals' lives. Um, but it there's not as much, I think, room for that creativity. When a, companion parrot owner says, "Oh, I wanna do something to enhance the quality of life for my bird," whether it be enrichment, giving them better nutrition, giving them, doing more training, it doesn't have to be on a very set schedule because there aren't 10
Right.
people who are trying to implement that schedule in most
Hmm.
cases.
Yeah.
But I think that's a difference for me.
Yeah. You have a lot more flexibility for sure as a pet parrot owner, and probably in most cases, more resources as well. If you're
Mhm,
dedicating your resources to one or a handful of birds, you probably have the ability to cover that better than in a zoological setting because they've got to divide all that resources up beyond so many. And
mhm,
everything that we do, I always come back to a question of resource.
yeah,
We can come up with big plans. We can enrich these animals, train them to do anything we want to do, but we've got the resources to be able to implement those programs. And that's whether it's in a zoological setting or whether that's in your home. You you've
mhm,
got to have the budget to be able to do that.
mhm,
Unfortunately, the reality is that you can do more with a bigger budget, but it doesn't mean that that's the end of it. If you're creative, you can certainly do a lot as well.
mhm.
That's one of our sun conure. I took a few videos and sent it out today. I was in a rush to get it done, so I sent it out to Robin. Um, I just wanted to make a point, about resources, right? That's what I just said. And for us, because we do a lot of free flight with our birds, they get a lot of their activities there, in getting out and flying around and actually engage in enriching activities while they're out there flying and chewing on branches naturally, taking baths and things as they're flying about, seeing hawks flying overhead. So these are all changes in their environment that provides kind of a well-roundedness to them. And in my mind, when I think about enrichment, I also think about that too, providing a well-rounded animal that can manage and
Mhm,
deal with multiple scenarios. Giving them tools, giving them toys to play with, things that they can manipulate, allows them to think about how do they get something out of something, how do they break something, how do they hang upside down, so there's a physical demand to enrichment activities as well.
mhm,
And for us, when we kind of put them in that situation where they are free flight outdoors, when they are laying on trees and hanging upside down, so there's component of enrichment activities in that. But when we don't, I can keep it pretty simple. I can either invest in a lot of toys, which are available to do that, or I can throw a browse in there for them, and they can
mhm,
occupy their time with that. If they get bored with that, we give them something else. We give them another toy that's they can
mhm.
practice their manipulation, of their beak and their
And I think,
nails.
one of the things that comes up for me is that they're able to do, they're able nails on a chalkboard, that they're able to, entertain themselves, if you will, that it's things that keep them occupied. And these are
Yeah.
your birds that you're using, Fung, or working with in a free flight situation. There's plenty out there that can be enriching, but they're still, they know how to do that. It's not, oh, I have to be with Fung or the trainer all the time, so that I am living an enriched life. They can definitely take care of things on their own.
Hmm.
That was the last picture, was just was one of Terry Clark, a friend who's a wonderful breeder. I don't know if Terry's on tonight, but yeah, this is one of Terry's birds with that uses that toy and sticks its head in that pod on the top. That's one of the toys we make at the Leather Elves, and um, Terry has actually adapted it. But yeah, he sticks his head in there and turns it into auditory. I had not planned it to be used that way. It was a foraging toy, but he has adapted that and uses that way. And so Nancy's, Nancy, we're going to talk about that too, that variety can be difficult, but it's a matter of the slightest change. I know, Fung, you've worked elephants, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember working with the elephants or talking to the elephant curator or manager at Baltimore, the Maryland Zoo. And one of the things we talked about was sometimes just the slightest change when you're working elephants, the slightest change
Yeah.
is, a whole day's worth of enrichment because it's
Yeah.
something very different in the environment. And I think, Nancy, we sometimes we overmanage our enrichment so that well, he's got to have this, and then he's got to have this, and he's going to use it this way. And sometimes it's more about that discovery piece. It's about just kind of seeing where things take you. And I found you mentioned it's a process for you. So how do you, when you're, so would you say that you have a program? You have a process, not a program.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So when we work
Okay.
with zoos, we set up a program. In our company, we have a process. And that just means when I say process, it just means that it all merged together. And we look at it slightly
Mhm.
different. We look at the outcome for the animal, right? So
Okay.
we say, what's a healthy animal, right? And then from that, we design that process. And that process could have enrichment components in it. It could have training components in it. It could have nutritional component in it. And sometimes it's one's more than the other, depends on what the animal
Yeah.
needs. So it's so flexible and so fluid. It's difficult in a way, because you can't put your finger on any one thing, right? Um, but in my mind, that for me is personally is an ultimate program because you're not tied down to one component only, and you sometimes you can be stuck if you're tied down to one component only. You're trying to solve a problem
Mhm.
with training alone, or you're trying to solve a problem with enrichment alone. And sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's a little bit of this, and a little bit of that. And when we're
Right.
creative, it can work really quickly and really fast, and really efficient as well. It's about managing your resources too. So, like you said, if you
Mhm.
didn't have variety and your resource is limited, you can also be creative with what you have as well. As Robin touched on, just simply placing that in a different place has different meaning. If you're one toy, if you hung it in one corner of the enclosure or the cage, it has one meaning. You put on the ground, it has another meaning. You hang
Mhm.
upside down, it has another meaning. You put a piece of food on it, it has a different meaning. Maybe you change the color on it, you put a bead on it, it's completely different now. So there are lots of things we can do, but beyond just giving it activities, which we can do too. Sometimes we give enrichment just for activity's sake. Just do something with it. But if we were to target behaviors, you would then have a lot more uh, purpose, I think. So it's not just simply random activities. So you say, I want this bird to be um, more engaging with the way it's moving its beak. Then that activity that you plan would target beak activity. So it's not just simply tossing a toy in there. And I think,
Mhm.
Robin, when I um, chatted with your dad years ago about enrichment items, we talked about that. We talked about, well, what's the purpose of the enrichment activity? What's the enrichment item? You know, for example, we talked about with birds of prey. Well, what do you want to do with birds of prey, right? You want them to grab at something, pull at it, just like the hawk that you saw in the video earlier.
Mhm.
You want them to grab at it and pull at it because that's a natural repertoire for them. And
Yeah.
so we want to replicate that. We don't really know all the answers to how to care for animals under human care, but what we do know, we can try and replicate,
Mhm.
and
And I
target
think,
those particular.
that was a big thing. And I remember when you and Dad talked about I remember the toy you're talking about. We did like a rawhide wrapped with fur woven through it, and it was fly by and grab for birds of prey. And I think the thing that was most interesting when I would talk to dad about it, because, he went into it and it was, we're going to create this and it's going to do this. And this is why it's going to do this. And he looked at it from the other side, that it was, what am I going to make? And then how are they going to use it versus what are they doing and how do I fit into that? And so I got to thank
Yeah.
you. It kind of opened our eyes as far as how do we, do that? I talk a lot to people about goal-based enrichment, and it's the fancy way of saying what you just said. It's, we're looking at, how do I get this bird to do more of what, or this animal to do more of what it would be doing? If it's, how do you encourage a bird to be more of the creature that it actually is versus, the creature that you want to turn it into?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so have you ever had that bird that just doesn't get it? Or the animal that just like, I have no idea what you're asking here?
Well, to tell the truth, Robin, it's, when we say when an animal doesn't get it, for me, the reality is that we'd fail at teaching them. That's really the bottom line for me. When we say that animal's stupid because it's not learning, it's really because we didn't have the right program to teach them. And so if we didn't have the
They
right
baited you
enrichment
into that
item,
question.
yeah, if we didn't have the right enrichment item to solve a certain target, problem, then we just didn't select the right one.
Yeah, and I think, part of that too is the observation skills that we have to develop. That, I can tell people all day long, this is a great enrichment item. This is, you should use this. But if I haven't watched their animal and watched, or maybe make it species specific, I haven't watched that species and know what that species does, I can't really make that suggestion. Um, I see people that, what should I get for my sun conure? What should I get? I have no idea, because that would be like me saying, what should I get for my friend who's a human?
Mhm.
Well, that doesn't help, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you approach that? How do you so now so all right, you go, you're at work, you go, okay, I want to provide some enrichment. How does that work for you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to look at it, Robin. One is that we can look at the perfect process, right? Or the perfect program. And the reality is that may not exist just because of the resource that's available to us. But we can shoot for that goal. We can say, this is what we really want. But that takes time, that takes resources. We can also say, well, at the minimum, here's what we can do. you know. And the minimum would be, let's say as a parrot owner, pet parrot owner, you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of resources. What's the minimum that we can do? Minimum we can do is just give them activities. I talk a lot about focus, right? We focus on the target and focus on the goal, but I'm going just the opposite direction. I'm saying if you don't have the resources available, then do the minimum. You know, give them variety. Just put a toy in there. If you don't want to think about it, you put a toy in there. At least observe and see if there's interaction happening. If there's interaction, great. You don't have a target behavior necessarily, but there's interaction, great. And then swap it out. Give them something else. Present it differently. You know, to present at a different time of day, for example. So just the variety in itself and how it's presented would be enough, would be minimally, as long as the animals engage with that, with what you're offering. And on the other end of it would be targeted, as we talked about, targeting a very specific goal. If this animal, let's say, and especially this can be very useful from a veterinary perspective as well, from a health of your animal. If your veterinarian tells you, well, your bird is has a soft pectoral muscles, right? So it's not very well developed. Your enrichment activity can improve that. So you would provide it an item or a physical location where it would encourage an opening of the wings, or where it would get on
Mhm.
and play and it would flap its wing because it's trying to balance itself. So these activities targets a certain result, right? And so
Mhm.
that's going to be
These,
opposite of just
the
general function.
just really quickly, the series that you're seeing here of pictures, are some babies of Terry Clark's, and Terry uses, the toy on the right-hand side on this picture is called a Foraging Freddy. Terry uses that to get the babies to balance. It hangs and it moves back and forth, and you'll see her stuff isn't always hanging right over a perch. So she's encouraging that balance. She's encouraging them to, to use all of those muscles and to really, and she also uses them. There's a picture, I think, Nick, of two of them on one toy, and it's she uses them for socialization, and she's got them they're, working together. I observed years ago, this wasn't parrots, it was bats. And I know my neighbor in Pittsfield will appreciate the story. We were working with fruit bats, and we created enrichment that they had to work cooperatively. They had to, it was a gravity feeder. One had to slide the sleeve up, and the other had to reach in to get it was flowers, to get the item out. And so it was teaching that kind of cooperative working, that a colony of bats, will sometimes do. So, there are so many things, and I think we get caught up in, well, I've got to give them wood to chew because it's good for their beak, and I've got to give them, foraging puzzles because they've got to learn how to do that. And we've become kind of pigeonholed in what we do, and there's so much more to what these animals are, and like you said, from a veterinary perspective, if we can, I mean, it's like, when your doctor sends you to physical therapy, you get things, they give you activities that you're supposed to do. We don't always do them, and your birds might not do what you want them to do either, or what you're asking them to do. Um, so so what about, what if you introduce something, um, and is there training that happens with that? So you've got a bird that maybe someone would describe as fearful. So how do we handle something like that? Because that comes up a
Yeah, yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where for me the process is so useful, where we can switch back and forth between training and enrichment. And so
Mhm.
it's just fluid, For me, I don't break it apart like that. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So what if you invest in a toy, an enrichment item, you give it to them and they never look at it. They run away to the other corner of the cage, and you're cursing Robin. Robin, I paid $50 for this toy and nothing's happening.
I'll give you a deal. It's a
Again,
BOGO
right?
sale this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. 2 for 1. Yeah. Um, no, but we said earlier, right? And we should remember this, and that is when the animal isn't doing what it's supposed to do, it's because we haven't taught it. That's really it. If
Mhm,
so, if an animal's not engaged in the enrichment item that you offered, it's because we haven't presented appropriately enough, for learning to
mhm,
happen. And so then we go into a teaching mode at that point. So then this is where training and enrichment intertwine, right? In lots of ways we can do that. We can do so by just gradual desensitization. So the animals start to see it in its environment with no negative or positive consequence, right? So it's a very easy process. We can go to a more active process where we actually teach it that there is positive consequence by its interaction with this object. And that's much faster, right? But again, it depends on resources. If you have the resource of time to be able to do it, then you can engage in the activity. But if you don't have the resource of time, then usually desensitization is your best choice. And you
mhm,
desensitize in a way that's beneficial to the animal. Again, going back to an errorless teaching strategy. So when I tell you, well, go desensitize that bird to this item, you don't go and stick it in the cage and say, here, deal with this item. You desensitize by finding out what is the distance that that animal will tolerate this item, and then back it up just a little bit, right? And you see that by how you present to the animal and how they react to it. So that's the preferred way to desensitize, is that you don't push them to the point where they simply give up in a kind of a learned helplessness scenario, but they learn that it's neutral enough. It has no negative consequence, no positive consequence. It's just there in the environment. And then gradually over time, you increase the distance, or decrease the distance rather, from the animal, and just bring it a little closer and a little closer and a little closer. Very easy, gradual process of desensitization. And then by the time it's close enough to the animal, it should have no negative issues with it where it needs to run away. And then at that point, something happens, it triggers. The animal should flip the switch and says, hey, this is something interesting. The curiosity switch kicks in because it's there, doesn't do them any harm. Eventually they come over and investigate. And then if you want to switch into a more active scenario, you can then engage in reinforcement strategy, right? Because now the animal's close enough that it's actually making physical contact. Then you can engage in a reinforcement strategy where you actually reinforce them with items that they like for that engagement. I think I sent a video, Robin, of a macaw engaging. Nick, that you can pull up.
Do we have that one, Nick?
I do not have that video, but I will see if I can find it.
Okay.
All right.
So
let
I
me
just
see if
shot
I
that
can
quickly.
find it, Nick.
So it's just an example, just a very quick example. I just shot it, I guess, yesterday maybe, or today, I can't remember now. 2 minutes, took 2 minutes to teach that animal to engage in an object, right? So it just shows you it doesn't have to be a lot of resource consuming. And a lot of times when I say resource, it's time and money, usually what it comes down to. So it doesn't have to be a lot of resource consuming.
No, I think,
as long as we have the right procedure.
Right. And I think, it's that people get invested in, I bought this and I put it in, and I've told this story a bunch of times. We were working with Silver Springs down in Florida, in Ocala, and they had a big collection at the time of citizens, and they bought a bunch of toys from the Leather Elves, and we shipped them down, and then they knew that we were coming to visit the park. So they threw one in every single cage. There was like brand new leather in every single cage, every citizen cage in the park. And I walked in and all the birds were on one side of the cage and all the Leather Elves toys were on the other side of the cage. There was no interaction happening. And I think we get very excited about, I know that this, I've watched my bird, I've observed what I know, the kind of behaviors that he really enjoys engaging in. And I'm gonna put this in and it's gonna be great. And we jump to that. Here's your video. Let's see what we.
Yeah, let me describe to you. So this bird has never seen these yellow balls hung on the side before, and so I just put it in just to shoot the video, right? And so what I'm failing at is showing you the right side of that video, where I'm shaping that behavior. So yeah, there it goes. Now you see my hand coming up with a seed. Now this bird has no interest in those balls at all, right? But the seed, by where I'm placing the seed, the feed in position, creates interaction, physical interaction with that, right? So that's the beginning of that training. Okay, so I'm just feeding, just coming up feeding. So that bird has to push the ball out of the way to get to the seed, right? So again, this very, very simple procedure. And you get the idea now, right? So eventually the bird gets, I push the ball, I get a seed, right? So then we just simply slow down the feeding process. By slowing down the feeding process along the way, the bird figures, okay, I previously pushed the ball out of the way to get to the food. If I try that, see now you see it. See, my hand wasn't quite in the frame yet, and she went ahead and pushed the ball out of the way. And eventually, after every repetition, I'll start slowing down the presentation of the food and wait for her to make contact there, see? And then my hand comes in with the food. Yeah, so really quick, there's just a really quick demonstration of how you can influence their behavior. So same challenge that you might see with the toy that you get from Robin. You hang it up there, they don't do anything. You just got to do a quick interaction, 2-minute interaction, and it gets it. Mm-hmm. See that? So she really pushed it out that time. Yeah, and so you can go on and on. I can. Robin.
I was just going to say, I think sometimes it's to do with that discovery phase that has to happen. When we think about what our birds are really about when they're out, you know, if they were a wild bird, they're not going to go right to new things immediately all the time. You know, sometimes it takes that I'm going to watch this, I'm going to observe, and then I'll interact. And for me, a lot of times, if I people will say to me, I've got a bird that won't chew wood, or I've got a bird that won't interact with toys, I'll put options for foraging on a toy so that it gets them there, and then they start to pair, okay, I get like it's the same situation as here. When I do this, I pair it with this reinforcer. So if I go and I interact with this item, I maybe get a treat out of the inside in between two pieces of wood or something like that. Um, and so Nancy, what do you do if they're afraid of those new toys? Well, I think afraid, is it afraid or is it observant? I mean, that would be my first question. What do you think, Fang?
Yeah, if I understand the question, afraid meaning fearful, right? Where the animal's actually running or flying away from the item, then it's pretty severe. In which case you would follow the same procedure we described. You start out with a desensitization process, then you move it into a reinforcement procedure, right? So meaning you show the animal the item, the object, at a far enough distance where it doesn't create that afraid response. Right? So far enough, even on the other side of the room if necessary, until it becomes neutral enough, decrease that distance, over time. So there's no rush there. Decrease that distance, and then eventually they just, there's no effect to it, right? What they believe in the beginning is that this object is harmful to them. That's why they respond that way. But over time and repetition, it's been proven that it's not harmful, it's neutral. Or the
Mhm.
logical expectation is that they will not show fear, over time. And then once it's close enough to them in proximity, then you can switch over to a reinforcement strategy. Does that make sense?
So Cindy, yes, absolutely. I mean, Cindy has a question here, Fang, that being fluffed up like that doesn't mean that you should stop the training. Because she always stops because she is afraid that it will reinforce the negativity. Um,
Being
you
fluff
know,
up meaning in a defensive posture, fluff up? Is
what
that what
we're
that
seeing in
means?
this video.
Oh, in this video. No, in this video is because this fluff up is more engaged. She's engaged right now. She's excited. And it's an excited fluff up.
Yeah, and I think you've got it takes time to kind of figure out what, which is which. And working with birds of prey I've always said that so a fluff, like it's called a rouse, is, the biggest gift when you've got a bird that you're working with and they will, sit on a glove for you or sit with you and rouse, then that fluffiness is a really good thing. And so, I know Cindy's got a cockatoo that is being challenging, let's put it that way. And sometimes with cockatoos, that fluff can mean one thing or something completely different. So yeah, I think so. I hope Cindy that answers that question. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. So much of it
Christina
depends
says
on
it looks,
context too.
yeah, yep. And Christina says it looks overstimulated to her. And that's, you answered that question before we even read it, that it's in the context. What context is that in? And it just, it's about, um, being able to watch their body language and really, you know, I think people get, I think we get to this point where people get really excited. I want to learn how to read bird body language. And they think that there's like you should be able to flip a picture and okay, this is what this
Hmm.
looks like. This is what this looks like. And I know Fung can tell you that there are so many nuances. And that's one of the things that Fung does really well. You read those nuances. And I think can you kind of describe that for what I'm saying, I think. Can you
Yeah.
explain for
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. It's hard to put into a book, of what to do because there's so many if then scenarios. Um, So if this, then this, and then if this, then that, if this, then this, you know. And so a posture like that, if you put onto a green screen, you can put into any number of scenarios and it would look
Yeah.
perfectly logical. You know, you can put this into a environment or green screen where there's a tiger on the other end, you know, and looks possibly perfect. You know, she's fluff up and she's defensive, right? Or you can put a bowl of seeds right in front of her and she's fluff up because she's excited for the seeds, right? So there's so
Mhm.
many things, but there are little minute behavioral components to this fluffiness that gives us more answer. Meaning, for example, when she's fluffed like that, how is she engaged with you? You know, is she leaning forward, you know, or is she leaning backwards? Is she leaning away from that object or towards that object, right? How are her eyes? Is her eye open, you know, to take in more information, or are they trying to be reduced where she doesn't want more information? You know, there's so
Mhm.
many little things like that that we have to take in and we calculate, and then we come up with the best guess as to what they're thinking, right?
Right.
That's what it's about, and it comes with practice. You know, I don't think we can write a book for you to say this is exactly what it's going to be because would be a very difficult book to write.
Yeah. I love the green screen reference, though. I think that's, it's so that's a great way to think about it because, it's and always tell people they know their birds best. I don't spend in every single day, and I'm sure when you consult, you're not spending every single day with the same animals, and you need that as a consultant, we need that information. We need to know, we need to see it. We need to see the video. We need to see the environment. And I think, when you talk about those little cues and those clues almost as to what's going on, the environment makes such a difference too.
Hmm. Yeah, but it comes with
So
practice, you know.
oh, yeah, absolutely, and it's fun to do. I mean, I think that's fun. In fact, maybe we should do a night where we do, body language, and we've done it before, and it's always fun to see people's responses. Um, yeah, I and eh, yeah, there's a whole paper turning in my head. I'm actually working on one right now that will be part of it, but, I think it's really about that observation, and we have people all the time, and I'm sure you hear it a lot. Well, this animal won't interact with any kind of enrichment. And like you said, it's about making sure it's the right enrichment. And it doesn't mean that, oh, you're a bad parrot owner if your bird doesn't play with a particular toy or if your bird doesn't go and forage for food in this case. It's just about thinking how you can adapt.
Yeah, for me, it's really about what the animal needs, you know, and so you have to decipher that
Mhm,
too. So, I mean, we might say, well, one owner with a parrot might see a need that this animal needs a series of 10 enrichment within a week's time. But another animal owner
yeah,
might see that their bird only needs 4 items of enrichment in a week, you know? So it wouldn't just be
yeah.
automatic. You look at what your animal needs because they may be fulfilled by other things already, you know? They may have
Mhm,
more of you to spend with them, and so they may be spending less time alone, you know? So if you
yeah.
think, well, they're spending a lot of time with you, but you're providing abundant of items to them, and you're seeing they're not interacting with it, then you think that's failure, right? It's just
Mhm.
an appropriate measure of success. You know? So you just got to
Yeah.
make sure you measure what it is that you're looking for, and then provide the
Mhm.
correct stimuli for it.
And I think that's important too, is that we figure out how do we measure that success? How do we, what is successful? For some birds, it's I put this item in the room and they looked at it, or I put this item in the room and they didn't retreat into the nest box,
Yeah.
and that may be okay, that's as far as I need it to go right now.
Mhm.
And I think you've I know there are people that you have worked with and I that are masterful when it comes to when do I make that leap?
Mhm.
When do I change it up a little bit and ask for a little bit more? And I think that applies to enrichment as well. And I know that you are particularly good at that too. So can you kind of explain to people, is there what's the what's this what happens in your head? We need to know what happens in Fung's head, as far as, okay, it's time to make that next step. What's the level of comfort, if you will, that you look for before you move on?
Yeah. Ask me that question again, Robin. I do want to come back and address just something you said earlier too. And that is just to remind ourselves that when an animal is not engaged in an enrichment item, we shouldn't consider that failure. We should actually consider that success in a way, because what we're measuring is a change in the animal's behavior, right? So every time you put an enrichment item in, they're over there and they tear it apart. That's not necessarily, in my mind, not necessarily success. It's a change in their emotional response that creates well-being too, that creates well-roundedness, right? That's what I look for. It's the opportunity for them to learn. And so if they can learn, they're increased in their ability to be, what's the word, to be kind of steady, right, in life, right? They're just more well-rounded. So I would look at that as success, as long as you're making progress, as long as they're making
Mhm.
progress, right? So you put it in the
Okay.
first time, they're like, whoa, get it away from me. But if you're developing a process where they learn to engage with it, then that's completely successful. Right? So don't think of
Mhm.
that as failure. Okay.
Okay, so back to let's ask that question, then I have another one. So when you are, increasing your I guess it's almost like increasing your criteria or, increasing your expectations and what you're asking
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
What's the measure for you when, okay, it's time to move to that next level? It's time, okay, so how does that work for you?
Yeah. If I'm speaking about what we do, in our work, a lot of the work that we do is measure against resources, right? And for
Mhm,
us, resource is generally time. And so we will try and make that process as short as possible to try and save on resources. So that's how we usually operate. But if you tell me, well, resource is not an issue, you can take as much time, as much money as you want and implement this program, then that's slightly different. So we always push the envelope a little bit because of the resource question. And we find that we can push it quite far, when we try, because the animals can learn quite well if we have the right procedure set in place for them to learn. At the same
mhm,
time, if we don't push them and we keep it so simple to learn all the time, they also won't learn as well, right? Because they will
okay,
stay at that step so long because you've reinforced that so many times. So they're not able or willing to move on to the next step. So how do we know, right? How do we know? For me, then we know when we push a little bit more, right? So we ask just a little bit more in the approximations. That's the only way I know, because if I don't push, I won't know, right? But I won't push so
right,
far where there's failure involved, right? Just enough
mhm,
where we see hesitation, that we know, okay, I didn't explain it well enough. So let me back up, make sure you understand it, and then we go again. You know? So that's it. That's
mhm,
it's most like it's like go push a little bit, see some results. If we're good, let's keep pushing. If we see some hesitation, let's come back, right? So it's a lot of this
mhm,
going forward, two-step forward, maybe a half step back, you know, three-step forward,
yeah.
maybe a step back.
And I think, you're talking about resources. It rings for me. I remember, talking to the owner of a rather large, company that works with animals, and him telling me that, you know, I was working with a rehab as well, and the rehab, she had no constraints. She didn't have to get out and do a show. She didn't have, she had animals that came in that were non-releasable. And it was her job to keep them healthy, nurse them back to health, keep them as healthy as they could be, and enriched, improve their quality of life in captivity. And I remember her saying that, if she had a golden eagle and she did, desensitization, but it took months And she would, she would sit and have volunteers, sit and just sit closer and read to the bird, and she had no time constraints, no resource constraints, so to speak. And this other person had a lot of resource constraints. It was, I've got to get a show out. I've got to get, this facility managed. I've got to get this done. I've got to consult over here. So we're going to push that a little bit more. We're going to push that envelope a little faster than some might be comfortable with. And
Yeah.
I've watched that person train. Person's a fantastic trainer, and has this kind of innate sense of how to make that happen, how to, move forward. And I think, again, it depends on what your situation is. So I have
Yeah.
I have my friend who just came in. I'm sorry, I've got Gronk the black lab who is afraid of thunder, who just came
Oh,
in. So he's
hello,
going to sit
friend.
with us, and he'll sit
Do you like
quietly. He
birds?
just needs he he have to chase. He would like to be close, so he's just going to hang out with me. That's okay. Sorry. Again, we're in a
We're all into
van. We're on
animals
the
in our
side of the
lives.
road. We've got dogs. We're all good.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So just to add to that question, Robin, there's a lot of kind of small details. I can give you kind of a brief outline on how we make decisions, but there's so many little details in moving forward. In working with animals, we can give cues, and there's prompts involved. There's the environment, and as long as we manage the environment properly, we can train them pretty well. Again, going back to that philosophy of an errorless, error-reduced learning strategy. If we manage it well, they'll learn it. And then we should also remind ourselves is if they're not learning it, that means we're not managing it well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really important. Um, okay, so let's talk a little bit just about enrichment in general, natural versus manufactured. Um, so do you think that I think sometimes enrichment just happens and we don't even have to do anything for it to happen.
Mhm.
Would you agree?
Yeah, simply activities is what you mean, right? Just activities,
Yeah.
engagement. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. And I think, um, so for me, an important part of providing enrichment that is appropriate, that is going to work, that is going to be engaging, a lot of that is knowing an animal's natural history,
Mhm.
and then knowing the individual. Um,
Yeah.
so do you come at it from, is that part of the process, knowing the natural history of this animal and then the animal itself, like that particular animal?
Yeah, I do. And I think for me personally, I don't go through the thought process necessarily. We
Just
do it because we're familiar with it. But when we teach
mhm,
it, yeah, we do go through that process. We ask our students to go through that process, write it down, do their
mhm,
research, learn about those animals, learn about those species, and learn about how they survive in the wild. How do they move about? How do they gather their food? So once we know that, it's easy to replicate that. And really, that's the only thing we can do best, right? Is to replicate
yeah,
what we know. Um, when we don't replicate and we try crazy things, then it could be a little crazy. Um, you know, yeah. So anyway, I think that's the simplest. Is replicate in nature.
mhm,
Is the easiest way to go and most accurate way to go.
yeah. And, I remember working with one facility, and I was working with the primate team, and, we were talking about enrichment. And one of the staff said that they gave their mountain gorillas, lowland gorillas, sorry, yeah, blue Jello because it was fun. And I remember I thought my head was gonna explode for a second, and then I said, "Well, why? What is that? Are they ever gonna encounter blue Jello in the wild? Are they ever going to be like, what does that have to do with anything that they're ever going to that they might have ever encountered if they were in the wild?" And, "Well, no, but it's fun." And I remember telling them, "Okay,
Yeah.
if the animal's engaged and they're interacting with it and they're doing something that's enhancing their quality of life in some way, then okay. Or maybe it's making them more active when they weren't active before.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
for me, it's got to be closer to nature than that, and
yeah, yeah.
it in
Well, I
which
think for
okay,
me,
no, I was going to say we're back at resources.
yeah, 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 yeah. And for me, Robin, I've been in those situations too, where both from both ends, where we are told that we have to use naturalistic looking items, right? And I've been on the other end where we've had to solve problems, behavioral problems with whatever tools we had available to us. The point for me though is to make sure that we're accurate in our assumption when we're moving forward. You know, so
Mhm.
for example, blue jello. If indeed the animals get excited about it, and if excitement is what we are after, then fine. If it meets a certain goal, but if it's in our head, then that's another story, right? If we believe the blue jello gives great results, then that we may have to revisit that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think
So I think as a
yeah.
parrot owner, you have to be careful with that too. Where you come in with a preconceived notion of what you want to see, and you think that's happening, but it may not actually be happening. So you have to take a step back and evaluate, or bring somebody in
Mhm.
and help you evaluate. With a different set of eyes.
And I think that's key, that second set of or third set of eyes, somebody to come and say, "Oh, no, 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 that's really not what's happening here." All right, spoiler alert, I'm working on a paper called "How Human Perception Shapes Our Response to Animal Behavior." Um,
Mhm.
because that I think this is how it's gonna work, and I think this is the response we're gonna get and all that. We do that, and I think we need to be so honesty in our relationship with our animals is super important. So,
Mhm.
um, and you mentioned having to correct a behavior, trying to replace a behavior with, perhaps an enrichment strategy. I know, I mean, that's like a whole nother night, but have you've done that, I'm sure.
We have, and some successful, some not really, because
Mhm,
challenging, or if we label them as problem behaviors, are challenging, and usually because they're ingrained, usually because they've gone so far before we corrected it. By the time we've recognized it to correct it, it's just so ingrained in the animal's repertoire. So we've
mhm,
been successful at some, not at others, and then somewhere in between. One of
yeah,
the ones that I remember was with a crow where it did some kind of feather damage behavior, and so
mhm,
to modify that, we did a couple things. One was to fill its day with activities. So the idea is that if it's doing this, then it can't be doing that, right? And
mhm,
so we filled it with activities, and then we also mirrored a certain behavior to that undesired behavior, right? But it would be placed on an item, right? So, for example, like blue jello.
blue
For
jello.
example, like yeah, um, uh, coconut fiber. We could place coconut fibers, and the activities of pulling on the coconut fiber mirrors the activity of pulling on a feather. And so, with both strategy working, we can see a reduction in the feather damage and behavior, because again, we're filling activity time. Just simply just doing lots of different things, and therefore it's not doing the behavior we don't want. And then also engage in a physical component of that. Sometimes it's a habit form behavior, right?
Mhm.
Like when people bite their nails, right? That's habit form. And so if you want to stop biting, um, I've never had that issue, but my guess is beyond just making it an unpleasant thing. The way people treat it is making it unpleasant. I would say give them an alternative also, to kind of either having a feeling of those nails being managed or giving your teeth something
Mhm.
to do, right? Beyond your nails, right? So that's the concept that we engaged in. So we dealt both in activity time budget and then also targeting the actual activity in itself. And yeah, it worked.
Yeah.
In some programs it worked great. Some programs it was iffy. So because we don't always know, with some of these
Well,
challenging
and I think
behaviors.
observation piece, that was something Dr. Friedman and I talked about when we did a session. It was about, we were talking about getting to the root of what's driving a behavior. What is reinforcing about a certain behavior? And, if it's that action of pulling something out like the cotton, I mean, the coconut fiber, then you've got that action happening. And you can just, it may not replace it entirely, but it takes up some of that time. And,
Yeah.
that's straight up behavior modification theory. If you think about it, replacing it with something that's contraindicated, you're going to get, um,
Yeah.
there, it's not going to happen. It won't happen for that short period of time anyway. Um, so this has been, thank you so much, for pulling over to the side of the road and sharing your owl with us. And it's funny. I have a lot of guests on Fung, and when you and I talk, it leads me to thinking about other things. It's like, okay, well, we could talk about that. We could do a whole nother session about X. And, so I really do appreciate the dialogue. So thank you very much.
Does your head hurt?
And does my,
Does your head
my
hurt?
head hurts. I drove past you last night on 95. So
Mm-hmm. Did you wave? Yeah,
I did. Did you not see me?
I missed it.
Oh, see, yeah, there you go. I need to get one of those horns. I'll wave on the way back. I'm going back on Sunday.
Mm-mm.
So,
Mm.
um, I got work to do. But thank you very much. And I think we should do this again. Maybe, people are gonna start talking, but we'll do it again. So thank you very
Sure,
much.
sure.
And hopefully I can get a whole bunch of people and we'll come and see you. If we don't see you before that, we'll come and see you at the
Mm-hmm.
zoo in August. So
Sure, yeah,
um,
yeah. Hey,
all right.
I have a ton of birds here. Do you want to see another special bird real quick? Your guests have
Yes,
time?
please. Yes.
Okay.
We always have
I'm gonna
time.
have to lay you down. I'm gonna have to lay you down, so you're gonna be looking at the ceiling of the van for a second.
Okay. Because we've never heard that in a van before. What? What?
Uh-oh. That's what I say to all the girls. Okay. Let's see if we can see. Back out more. Okay, there we are. Okay, let's bring you around, dude. Because of the delay on this feed, I've got to figure out how to get him into frame here. There. Yeah, that's better. Right? Where are you? Do you know, anybody guess what this is? We're too close.
You got guesses out there?
Okay, how about that? You see it better?
Yes.
This is, if you don't know, a European buzzard. My lighting is not great in here. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna turn the lighting on so you can see. Because what's special about this guy has to do with his colors. Okay, now we can see us better. There we are. Okay. Let's see. There. Okay. This is a European buzzard or a European hawk, right? And normally they're brownish in color, kind of like a red-tailed hawk. But this guy here happens to be a golden morph. So again, the lighting doesn't show it very well, but he's golden in
Oh,
color, kind of golden, blonde. Too
so
much light now,
cool.
I think. Yeah. Anyway, if you do come to the National Zoo, you'll be able to see this guy. He'll be out there.
Nice.
That's awesome.
We will definitely be there. So, yeah, it's about, I think Herndon is about 45 minutes maybe from the zoo. But we'll make it happen. So,
Okay.
all right. Well, you take care. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us tonight. And remember, we've got the BOGO sale going on through June. It includes free shipping on orders of $100 or more. And next week's topic is planning for the future and considering the what ifs. And my special guest is Patty Christie. So we're going to talk about how to, sometimes things do just happen, but we're going to figure that out. And how can we make some plans so that we can avoid some of the catastrophes? Frank, the zoo it's the Smithsonian Zoo, and it's on, what street is it on, Fung?
Connecticut Avenue.
Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C. Buzzards and vultures. In Europe, hawks are called buzzards. You're messing everybody up, Fung. This is so. Oh, we haven't got sound for you. So in Europe, hawks are referred to as buzzards. So it's a European buzzard, but it's what we would refer to as a hawk. And then vultures are a very different animal. And my dog friend's back.
Yeah. We
Um,
just misuse the term buzzard here in the US. We
Yeah.
just butcher the term, that's all. Yeah, they're supposed to be.
There you go.
Buzzards are actually vultures.
One of my favorite birds of all time to work with was Sid Price's Prophet, who was an auger buzzard. One of the coolest birds I have ever worked with. So, all right, you guys, everyone take care, and we will see you next week. Thank you again, Fung. We'll see you next week with Patty, and we'll talk about futures planning. So take care, everybody. Good night.